Josh Frydenberg, welcome back.
Nice to see you, Barry.
So the Finkel review suggests that you can reduce emissions, you can cut power prices and keep coal in the mix. It just sounds too good to be true.
Well, I think Dr. Finkel's produced an excellent report, and that's why it's received broad-based support from BlueScope to BHP, from the Business Council to the Clean Energy Council. We face higher electricity prices, and that's because we don't have regulatory certainty, and that is hampering investment. Dr. Finkel tries to deal with this through the clean energy target. We also face a less stable system because we've failed to properly integrate wind and solar, and he deals with that with more battery storage. And in order to meet our international commitments, we need to properly integrate climate and energy policy. So I think on all three issues, Dr. Finkel does a pretty good job.
All right, now coal is always central to this. How can you put in place incentives, significant incentives for clean energy without at the very least discouraging coal?
Well, coal has served Australia very well in the past, and according to the IEA will continue to do so in the future. What Dr. Finkel has done is not put any prohibitions. He's only put incentives. And under his modelling, you will still get more than half of Australia's power in the national electricity market from coal by 2030. So I don't think we should discount the importance of coal as a baseload source of power, and Dr. Finkel takes that into account.
Yeah, and you're right, no prohibitions, he's not ruling it out. But the point that I make, though, the incentives must discourage investment in coal.
Well, that's punishing, and that's a carbon price, and this is not a carbon price.
But why would that not happen in this case, given the nature of the incentives for renewables?
Well, it's incentives for lower emission technology. Now, that could be coal, which is with carbon capture and storage, that could be gas, or that could be renewables. But the key point is we don't want to punish the existing coal generators because we want them to remain an important part of the energy mix going forward. Indeed, lower electricity prices, which is an outcome of the Finkel review, and a more stable system, which was his primary concern, are better served by keeping coal in the system.
And you specifically mentioned existing coal. As you reduce emissions by 28%, how would that in any way encourage new coal-fired power stations?
Well, as Dr. Finkel said, it's totally conceivable that there could be a new coal-fired power station, or indeed a retrofit or an upgrade to existing coal-fired power stations. But what he is interested in is not the inputs as much as he is interested in the outputs, and that's dealing with that trilemma the Prime Minister established, which is lower electricity prices, a more stable system, and staying consistent with our Paris targets.
But as you're having discussions with your own people, are you not saying to them, look, this pretty much implies no new coal?
No, I'm not saying that. What I'm saying to them is...
You don't accept that's the case?
Well, the market will determine it, and that's the key point. What we're interested in is dealing with the trilemma, Barrie, and avoiding the current regulatory uncertainty which is preventing new investment, whether it is coal, whether it's gas, or indeed renewables in the post-2020 period.
And you're right when you say the market will determine it. Economics will determine it. And surely people contemplating a new coal-fired power station would look ahead 15 years and say, that's not on.
Well, I think that's a very important point, that people who are making these investments in power generation are making 30 to 40 year bets. And when they go to their banks, there are risk premiums based on the uncertainty in the regulatory environment. So by settling the regulatory environment through the Parliament, you can provide for more investment to the future, which is critical for Australia because we need to ensure there's sufficient supply to meet future demand.
The figure in the review, the 0.6% tonnes per kilowatt hour, that's when you cut off the subsidies. How flexible is that? That can move around in your discussions?
Well, Dr. Finkel made a point to the Premiers and the Prime Minister, as well as in his press conference, that he was not recommending a specific baseline. That will be the subject of consultation. But look, I don't want to preempt any discussions I'm going to have with my Cabinet colleagues and my party room colleagues. Dr. Finkel's produced an excellent report. It's comprehensive. It's more than 200 pages in length. We will need to consider it in detail and then make decisions going forward.
And you don't see this model as a price on carbon, but it does mean, as you said, a price signal. What's the difference?
Well, a price on carbon punishes emissions. A market signal, in this case, a clean energy target, incentivises lower emissions.
Price on electricity, they're saying that households could save $90 a year. Now, given that increases are already locked in some states. Why should people believe that?
Because the reason why power prices are going up is because of the wholesale or the generation component of the bill. And that can only be solved by getting more supply. And the only way you can get more supply is getting more investment. So what Dr. Finkel has come up with is a model to create the stable regulatory environment which will generate that investment.
Now, Craig Kelly, Chair of your Environment Committee, a Liberal, was talking about the 42% renewable target. He's described it as extreme. That's a problem for you, isn't it?
Well, under Dr. Finkel's modelling, the large-scale wind and solar is only 24% by 2030. The rest of the renewables is what are called baseload renewables, namely hydropower or solar panels on people's roofs. Now, that is not incentivised by the clean energy target and would be exactly the same level in 2030 with or without Dr. Finkel's model. The other key point here is Dr. Finkel is requiring now renewables to provide the storage, be it from batteries or pumped hydro or some other means, as well as the stability services. And so we're now dealing with a new environment where renewables will have to provide the stability to the system that they previously didn't.
Yeah, and you saw the poll that I referred to early on. I mean, clearly renewables are popular in the community. Does Craig Kelly, others, Tony Abbott not understand that?
Look, I think they all understand the point about renewables being popular, but the point is the public's primary concern is affordability and the stability of the system. Now, Dr. Finkel...
Is it, or is there concern more about climate change and the impact of that?
Look, that's a real concern, and that's why Dr. Finkel has solved for that trilemma. He has managed to come up with a proposal which deals with lower electricity prices, and not just for households, but for industrial users as well, a more stable system, and being consistent with our international commitments.
You might recall Peter Credlin, who worked for Tony Abbott, saying that when he was running the policy, he made it about the hip pocket, not about the environment. Now, as Minister for the Environment, you'd have to take the reverse view to that, wouldn't you?
Well, it comes back again to the trilemma. You can't deal with emissions without understanding its impact on affordability and stability. Likewise, we can't deal with affordability and stability and a mechanism without understanding its impact on the environment.
And you can't just focus on the hip pocket and ignore the environment. And that's what Tony Abbott seemed to have argued there, according to Peter Credlin.
Well, Tony Abbott and the rest of the government understand the critical importance of driving down electricity prices. And as Dr. Finkel said,
Do
Barrie,
they equally understand that something has to be done about climate change?
Look, I think everyone is conscious of that, and as you know, it was Tony Abbott's government that entered into the 26 to 28% target at Paris. But we are determined to drive down electricity prices, and as Dr. Finkel said, his modelling would lead to 10% reduction for households and a 20% reduction for large-scale industrial users.
Have you spoken to Tony Abbott since Friday?
I haven't spoken to him since Friday, but I have spoken to Tony Abbott.
In the knowledge of the Finkel review?
In the lead up to the Finkel review I did, and it was a very constructive and friendly conversation, and I explained to him the problem that we're trying to solve for, which is trying to get a regulatory environment which encourages investment in order that we don't have any more blackouts in the future and that we get prices lower.
Did he say then that he wants a great big argument with Labor over this? Because that doesn't sound like the language of compromise.
Well, I mean, Tony Abbott understands that our concerns are lower electricity prices and a more stable system. When it comes to the Labor Party, look at what they do, not look at what they say. We as a party are interested in lower prices, a more stable system, and meeting our international agreements. We're not interested in ideology, we're not interested in electricity taxes, and we're not interested in reckless targets like the 45% emissions reduction target Bill Shorten has.
How important is it to get Tony Abbott and his supporters on side, or in the end do you just simply do what you think is right?
Well, they're all valued members of the party room, and as you know, Barrie, we have a considered process through Cabinet, through the party room. I don't want to preempt that. I'm talking to all my colleagues and taking them through the challenges we face, taking them through the Finkel recommendations, and then as a government, with the Prime Minister's strong input, we will land a position.
How important then is it to get Labor on board?
Well, of course, in any area of policy which requires legislation, you want bipartisanship. But we're not going to come to the table with Labor unless they drop their commandments, which are higher electricity taxes, their ideology and their reckless targets. We will come to a discussion with Labor on our own terms.
But you know, you could come up with your own policy, but without Labor on board, there's no certainty. Because beyond the next election, the policy might change again, and certainty surely is critical to this.
Certainty is at the heart of this, and that is why you've seen the big industrial users. I mean, BlueScope, the biggest manufacturer in the country, BHP, Rio, Glencore, the National Farmers Federation, the National Energy Council, all these major groups have said we need to solve for integrating climate and energy policy. Dr. Finkel offers a pathway forward. Let's just see how we go.
And do you accept that if in the end you were able to come to an agreement with Labor on this policy, that the public would say, well, finally, the major parties have agreed on a big public policy issue, it would be a positive for both sides?
Well, I certainly think, as the Prime Minister said, the public are looking for us to take the politics out of it, to focus on the engineering and the economic challenges. Business as usual is not an option for us because we are dealing with a less stable, higher price system. We need to adopt a technology neutral approach, and we need to put consumers first.
Thanks for your time this morning.
Nice to be with you.